Everyone laughed at the cleaning lady who offered to be a translator. But when she spoke fluent Italian to a Sicilian Mafia boss, every armed man in the room fell dead silent. The video call was going to connect in exactly 2 minutes, and the official translator for Ravenna Holdings was lying unconscious in the executive bathroom with blue lips and white eyes. Clara Whitmore knew this because she had just mopped that hallway and heard the screaming. Poison, she muttered to herself, pushing the cleaning cart down the 32nd floor corridor. I would bet my paycheck someone got to him before the meeting. She was right. She always was. But nobody ever asked the mop lady for her opinion. In the steel-reinforced conference room, chaos wore a different face. 12 armed men in black suits were gathered around a bulletproof table, hands twitching near their holsters. Nikolai Ravenna, the 37-year-old mafia boss who looked like he had been born in shadows and raised by violence, stood motionless by the window. His gray eyes were cold as steel, the kind of eyes that never blinked when ordering a death. A man who clearly had not slept in 48 hours. But no one dared to notice. If you enjoy stories like this, hit the like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more. Now, let us see what happens when the Invisible Woman becomes the only one who can save them all. Maxwell Stone stepped into the conference room with a face gone pale, his lips pressed so tightly together they almost disappeared. He had been Nikolai's right hand for 15 years, and had witnessed more deaths than he could count. Yet at this moment his hands still trembled slightly as he lifted the phone. 90 seconds, he said, his voice hoarse and strained. Reed has been poisoned. The doctors say he'll live, but he can't speak for at least 2 weeks. His vocal cords were damaged. The room seemed to have all the air sucked out of it. 12 men, each of whom had killed without hesitation, suddenly looked small and helpless, like lost children. Nikolai still didn't turn around. He stared out the window, down at the city 32 floors below, where millions of people were living their ordinary lives, unaware that up here, an empire was starting to sway. Who did this? He asked, his voice low and even, like a machine. We're investigating, Maxwell replied. But right now the problem is the call with Benedetti. There's no one to translate. Nikolai finally turned around. His gaze swept across the room like a razor blade, forcing each man to lower his eyes. Who in this room speaks Italian? He asked. It wasn't a question. It was an order. Silence followed. The kind of heavy silence where you could hear every heartbeat. 60 seconds, Maxwell reminded them, his voice tight as a drawn wire. Henderson, the salt-and-pepper-haired man sitting closest to the door, suddenly raised his hand. The entire room turned to look at him, a flicker of fragile hope passing between them. I know a little Italian, he said, his voice shaking. Nikolai raised an eyebrow. How little is a little? Henderson swallowed. I know how to order pizza. Una pizza margherita, per favore, and thank you. Grazie. He tried to smile, but the smile died on his lips when he saw Nikolai's eyes. If you say that to Carlo Benedetti, Nikolai said slowly, each word like a nail being driven into a coffin, I'll personally cut out your tongue and send it to your wife as a birthday gift. Henderson went white, dropped his hand, and shrank into his chair as if he wanted to disappear. 45 seconds, Maxwell said. Call a translation company, Nikolai ordered. No one is answering, sir. We've called 7 companies. Nikolai ground his teeth. There are 300 people in this building. Not one of them speaks Italian. We've asked, Maxwell replied, his voice almost desperate. No one does. Nikolai walked toward the conference table, each step like a hammer striking stone. He stared at the sleek black phone resting at the center of the table, the phone that would ring in less than a minute, the phone carrying an $80 million contract and control of the transatlantic shipping route. 30 seconds, Maxwell said, his voice sounding like a death bell. The room sank into silence. No one dared breathe too loudly. No one dared move. 12 of the most powerful men on the east coast of the United States stood there like statues, helpless before a problem so absurdly simple it was humiliating. They could kill, they could wipe out an entire bloodline with a single phone call, but none of them could speak one complete sentence in Italian. And at that exact moment, at the most desperate second of all, the glass door of the conference room suddenly swung open. But let us go back a few seconds earlier, before the glass door opened, when Clara Whitmore was still standing outside in the hallway with her cleaning cart. She stood there, right in front of the thick glass door that looked strong enough to stop bullets, staring into the conference room, where the 12 most powerful men in the city were panicking. She shouldn't have been there. She knew that. The 32nd floor wasn't a place for people like her. People who pushed mop carts. People who cleaned up blood after midnight. People the bosses looked straight through as if they were air. Clara looked down at her hands. Hands wrapped in yellow rubber gloves, nails cut short, hardened by 4 years of holding brooms and buckets. Hands that had once been broken by the man she used to love. Hands that had dug her mother's grave in the cheapest cemetery in the city because she didn't have enough money to buy a more decent place. The hands of a loser, she thought bitterly. The hands of someone invisible, but also the hands that had turned every page of Italian grammar books every night for 3 years. The hands that had written hundreds of essays in Italian that no one had ever read. The hands that had recorded every fragment of dialogue, every coded phrase, every threat she overheard in the rooms she cleaned. "Walk away," the voice of reason echoed in her head. "This isn't your business. You're a janitor. You mop floors. That's your job. Push the cart and forget what you saw." Clara tightened her grip on the handle of the cleaning cart. She should listen. She knew she should listen. In this world, people like her weren't supposed to draw attention. Attention meant danger. Attention meant death. Her father had died because he drew attention, because he got involved with people he never should have been involved with. Her mother had died because there was no money for treatment after her father was gone. And she had almost died at the hands of the man who once promised he'd love her for life. "Walk away," the voice of reason repeated, more urgently this time. "You don't owe them anything. They've never seen you. They'll never see you. You're just a shadow in this building, and a shadow shouldn't try to become a person." But her feet didn't move. She stood there, staring through the thick glass, watching Nikolai Ravenna stand frozen like a statue, watching Maxwell Stone bite his lip until it bled, watching Henderson shrink into himself after the stupid joke about pizza. And then she saw what made her heart tighten. The corner of the room, a small figure curled up on a chair far too large for her tiny body. A little girl, maybe around 7 years old, hair black as ink, bent over a sketchbook, scribbling something with colored pencils. No one was looking at her. 12 men were panicking, and not one of them remembered there was a child in the room. Clara knew that girl. Mia Ravenna, the boss's niece, the daughter of the younger brother who had died in a Mafia war 3 years earlier. Clara had seen Mia many times while cleaning, always sitting alone in some corner, always drawing, always forgotten, as if she were invisible just like Clara. 20 seconds. She heard Maxwell's voice through the crack in the door. Clara's heart began to race. She looked at Mia, at the child no one saw, and suddenly she saw herself at 7 years old, alone, afraid, invisible. 15 seconds. "You'll die if you step in there," the voice of reason screamed. "They're Mafia. They kill without hesitation. You're just a janitor. If you fail, they won't fire you. They'll kill you." 10 seconds. Clara looked at her hands one last time. Janitor's hands. Calloused hands. Hands that had lost everything and had nothing left to lose. Then she looked up, straight into the room full of monsters, and did the most reckless thing she had ever done in her 27 years of life. She pushed the door and stepped inside. The glass door clicked shut behind Clara. A soft sound, but in the silence of that room it rang out like a gunshot. 12 heads turned at once. 12 pairs of eyes fixed on her. 12 faces shifted from panic to surprise, then from surprise to something Clara had known all too well for 27 years of her life. Contempt. Clara stood there in her faded silver-gray janitor's uniform, yellow rubber gloves still on her hands, her hair pulled up high with loose strands falling free after a full day of work. She looked like something that didn't belong in that room, like a stain on an expensive Persian carpet, like a system error in the perfect machine of power and violence. Henderson was the first to break the silence. He let out a snort, the kind people make when they see something both ridiculous and pitiful. Then his laughter burst out, shrill and cruel. "Well, look who it is," he said, leaning back as if watching a comedy show. "The janitor. What does she want? To clean the conference room right now?" The laughter spread like an infection. A gaunt-faced man sitting beside Henderson chuckled. "Maybe she thinks we need someone to mop the floor before Benedetti calls." Another man, heavy-set with a neck like a bull's, laughed loudly. "Or maybe she wants to ask if we need the bodies cleaned up after the meeting." The whole room erupted in laughter. It wasn't joyful laughter. It was the laughter of the powerful, aimed at the weak, the laughter of wolves when a rabbit wanders into the den. Clara didn't move. She stood there, back straight, eyes forward, letting the laughter crash over her like waves. She was used to it. 4 years working here. 4 years being treated like air. 4 years hearing poisonous jokes they didn't bother to lower their voices for because they thought she didn't understand. But she did. She always did. Henderson stood up and walked toward Clara with the expression of a cat playing with a mouse. "Hey girl, he said, his voice sweet but his eyes cold. Do you know where you are? This isn't a bathroom for you to clean. This is the meeting room of important people. You don't belong here. I speak Italian, Clara said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was clear enough to cut through the laughter. The room went silent for a second, then exploded again twice as loud. The gaunt-faced man nearly fell off his chair laughing. She speaks Italian, he repeated, tears streaming from laughing too hard. She probably knows how to say ciao and arrivederci and thinks she's a translator. Henderson took another step closer, close enough for Clara to smell the expensive cigar on him. Listen, sweetheart, he said, lowering his voice as if speaking to a child. We need someone to talk to the Sicilian Mafia, not someone who knows how to read an Italian restaurant menu. You understand the difference, right? Or is your level of education not enough to understand? The laughter roared again. Someone at the far end of the table spoke up. Send her back, Henderson. She probably learned Italian on social media. Those 30-day videos. Yeah, the fat man chimed in. 30 days to master Italian. 100% money-back guarantee. The room shook with laughter. Henderson turned to the others, grinning as if he'd just told the funniest joke of his life. But Clara still didn't move. She didn't lower her head. She didn't blush. She didn't run. She had endured far worse than this. She had endured beatings. She had endured the deaths of her father and her mother. She had endured 3 years of living in hell with the man who promised he'd love her. A few sneers from men who knew nothing about her couldn't hurt her. Nothing could hurt her anymore. I didn't learn online, she said, her voice still steady. I taught myself. 3 years. Every night after work. I don't have a degree because I couldn't afford one, but I can translate any business document. Henderson raised an eyebrow, thick like a caterpillar. Taught yourself, he repeated mockingly. 3 years. Every night. He turned to his men. You hear that? The janitor taught herself Italian every night, probably between cleaning toilets and taking out the trash. The laughter exploded one last time, louder and crueler, as if trying to grind Clara into dust. But amid all that laughter, there was one man who didn't laugh. Nikolai Ravenna still stood motionless by the window, steel-gray eyes fixed on Clara. No contempt, no mockery, just watching, measuring. And that look frightened Clara more than all the laughter combined. Nikolai stepped forward. Each of his footsteps struck the marble floor like a hammer blow, and with every step, the laughter in the room faded away until it vanished completely. When he stopped in front of Clara, less than a single step away from her, the room had sunk into absolute silence. No one dared breathe too loudly. Henderson backed away, his face drained of color, as if he had suddenly realized he'd been joking with something that should never be joked about. Nikolai was almost a head taller than Clara. He looked down at her, gray eyes cold as a Siberian winter, and Clara looked back. She didn't lower her head. She didn't look away. She'd looked into the eyes of a devil before, in the cramped apartment where she'd been beaten for 3 years, and she'd survived. She wouldn't collapse before another gaze. What's your name? Nikolai asked, his voice low and even, like water flowing through a cavern. Clara Whitmore, sir. How long have you worked here? 4 years, sir. 4 years, Nikolai repeated, as if chewing on each word. 4 years and I've never seen you. Clara didn't answer. She knew it wasn't a question. People like her weren't meant to be seen. That was how this world worked. You speak Italian, Nikolai continued. Real Italian, not tourist Italian. Clara took a deep breath. This was the moment that would decide everything. She could step back, apologize, say she'd been mistaken, and push her cleaning cart away as if nothing had happened. But she'd gone too far to turn back. She'd walked into this room, stood before killers, let them laugh at her. If she retreated now, it would all be meaningless. So Clara opened her mouth and spoke. In Italian. Yes, sir. I speak Italian fluently. I taught myself for 3 years, every night after finishing my shift. I don't have formal credentials because I couldn't afford them, but I can translate any business document and conduct any negotiation. I also understand the language of the underworld, the words outsiders aren't meant to know, the codes you use when you think no one is listening. But I listened. For 4 years, I heard everything. Her voice was clear, her pronunciation precise down to every syllable, her intonation natural, as if she'd been born in Florence rather than in the slums of this city. The room went dead silent, not the silence of contempt from before. This was the silence of people who'd just been slapped in the face by reality. Henderson's mouth fell open, his eyes bulging as if they might pop from their sockets. The gaunt-faced man sat frozen like a statue, his hand still half raised as if he'd meant to speak but couldn't find a single word. Maxwell Stone lifted an eyebrow, something almost like admiration flickering through his gaze. Nikolai's expression didn't change. He studied Clara for several long seconds that felt like centuries, then spoke slowly. "Do you know how important this call is?" Clara nodded. $80 million in control of the transatlantic shipping route. Nikolai's eyes narrowed slightly. "How do you know that?" "You talk as if servants don't have ears," Clara replied, still in Italian. "But we do, and we hear very clearly." Something passed through Nikolai's eyes. Not anger, not contempt, perhaps curiosity. Or perhaps something far more dangerous. "If this fails," he said, switching to English, his voice dropping to almost a whisper, "I won't fire you." "You understand what I mean." Clara understood. In this world, failure didn't mean losing your job. Failure meant losing your life. She was betting 27 years of her existence on a single phone call. "I understand, sir," she replied, her voice steady. Nikolai looked at her for one more second, then turned and pointed to the chair beside the phone. The chair Thomas Reed had occupied for 15 years. The chair of the official interpreter. The chair no one ever imagined a janitor would sit in. Clara stepped forward. She felt 12 pairs of eyes burning into her back, heard the poisonous whispers behind her. "This will be a disaster. The janitor's insane. We're all dead." She sat down. The leather chair was cold, stiff, unfamiliar. But Clara didn't care. She looked at the sleek black phone in front of her, at the screen still dark, and waited. 5 seconds, Maxwell counted down. And at that moment, from the corner of the room, Clara felt someone watching her. She turned her head. Mia Ravenna, the 7-year-old girl she'd seen through the glass, was looking up from her sketchbook. The child's wide eyes rested on Clara, not afraid, not contemptuous, only filled with a child's pure curiosity. Then Mia smiled. A small smile, almost imperceptible, the kind forgotten children give to invisible adults, as if she were saying, "I see you. I believe you." The screen lit up. The connection was established, and the face of Carlo Benedetti, the Sicilian Mafia boss, appeared before them all. Carlo Benedetti looked like time had forgotten him, 65 years old, yet his eyes were still sharp as razors, his white hair slicked perfectly back, his face carved with deep lines where every wrinkle told a story of power and blood. He sat in a room overlooking the Sicilian Sea, the late afternoon sunlight behind him forming a halo around his silhouette, as if he were a saint, rather than a man who had ordered hundreds of deaths over 40 years of ruling the underworld. Beside Carlo sat a younger man, perhaps around 40, with sharp features and eyes filled with open disdain. Francesco Benedetti, Carlo's son and heir, notorious for his temper and his habit of looking down on everything that didn't belong to Sicily. "Buonasera," Carlo said at last, his voice slow, as if savoring each word. "I see there has been a change in your conference room, Nikolai. Where is Mr. Reed? I rather miss his boring face." Clara translated immediately, her tone steady and professional. But she didn't translate words alone. She translated the way Carlo paused before saying Reed's name. The way he stressed the word change. The way his aged eyes swept across the room as if counting every man present. He knew. Clara was certain of it. Carlo Benedetti knew Reed had been poisoned, and he was testing how Nikolai would respond. Nikolai didn't flinch. "Mr. Reed had an unexpected health issue," he replied in English, for Clara to translate into Italian. "We have a replacement," Clara translated, but she added something subtle, a firmness in the voice, a confidence the original sentence didn't quite carry. She knew that in this world, weakness was death. If Carlo smelled blood, he'd strike. Carlo tilted his head, eyes narrowing slightly as he studied Clara through the screen. "A replacement," he repeated in Italian, his tone loaded. "A young woman. Have you hired a new interpreter? Or are you testing my patience, Ravenna?" Clara translated word for word, adding nothing, taking nothing away. She knew Nikolai needed to hear exactly what Carlo said, needed to grasp the suspicion, and perhaps even the insult woven into that question. "She's competent," Nikolai replied coolly. Clara translated into Italian, and this time she let a faint edge slip into her voice, as if daring Carlo to doubt it further. Francesco laughed, a rough sound full of contempt. He spoke quickly in Italian, deliberately, to see if Clara could keep up. "Competent. She looks like she just walked out of a cleaning closet. Is Ravenna so poor now that he's using servants as interpreters? Or is your empire collapsing faster than we thought?" Clara translated every word, her voice still flat, still controlled. She saw Henderson and the others tense, despite not understanding Italian. They recognized the insult from Francesco's tone and laughter, but she also saw something else. She saw the way Carlo shot his son a displeased glance, the slight shake of his head, as if warning Francesco not to talk too much. Carlo turned his gaze back to the screen, and this time he spoke more slowly, more carefully, as if placing stones one by one in a chess match. "I hear there's trouble inside your organization, Nikolai. People are saying there's a traitor. People are saying someone is selling information to your enemies. People are saying you no longer have control over your own men." Clara translated, but she did more than that. She translated what Carlo didn't say. She translated the way he emphasized "people are saying," as if he knew for certain rather than merely hearing rumors. She translated the pauses after each sentence, letting the words sink in like poison. She translated his gaze, the way he looked at Nikolai as if saying, "I know you're weak and I'm deciding whether to strike." When Clara finished translating, she added quietly in English, her voice low enough that only Nikolai could hear. "He's testing you. He knows about Reed. He might know more than that." Nikolai didn't look at her, but she saw his jaw tighten slightly. He understood. "Rumors are for the weak-minded," Nikolai replied, his voice cold as ice. "I don't care about rumors. I care about the $80 million contract in front of us. Does Mr. Benedetti want to discuss gossip, or does he want to do business?" Clara translated into Italian, letting her voice carry the weight of authority. Not her authority, but Nikolai's. She was his voice now, and she wouldn't let that voice tremble. Carlo stared at Clara through the screen, and for the first time, a small smile appeared on his lips. "This girl is interesting," he said in Italian, as if speaking to himself. "Very interesting." Francesco didn't like being ignored. It showed clearly on his face when his father focused his attention on the interpreter girl instead of the negotiation itself. He leaned forward, his eyes black as tar, staring at Clara through the screen with undisguised contempt. "Let me tell you this, girl," Francesco said in Italian, slow and dripping with poison. "You may fool my father with a few memorized Italian phrases, but you won't fool me. I see exactly who you are, a servant trying to play the game of powerful men. Do you know what happens to servants who try to climb onto their master's table? They get kicked back to the ground and crushed." Clara translated every word, her voice still completely devoid of emotion. She had heard worse than this. She had been called names far uglier than these. Her former man had called her useless, trash, something not worth living, before beating her black and blue. Compared to those words, Francesco's insults were nothing more than wind brushing past her ears. But then Francesco added more, and this time he smiled. The smile of someone who believed he held the knife while the other stood empty-handed. "I wonder what you did to earn that seat. A new interpreter, or something else. Maybe Ravenna needed someone to warm his bed at night and you were the cheapest option available." The room froze. Henderson and the others didn't understand Italian, but they understood Francesco's tone, the malicious laughter behind his words. Maxwell's hand tightened on the back of his chair. Nikolai stood motionless, yet the air around him seemed to thicken, as if anger were boiling beneath ice. Clara should have translated that line. It was her job. Translate everything, add nothing, subtract nothing, judge nothing, but she didn't translate. Instead, she spoke directly to Francesco, in Italian, without passing through anyone. "Young Mr. Benedetti," she said, her voice calm as if discussing the weather. "In your world, I understand that men often use insults toward women to cover their own insecurities. But I also understand that those who talk the most are usually the ones who do the least. You say, I am a servant trying to climb onto my master's table. Perhaps you're right, but at least I climbed there on my own feet. You, on the other hand, have been sitting on your father's shoulders for 40 years and calling it success." Francesco went pale. His jaw clenched so tightly that Clara could hear his teeth grinding through the microphone. "You dare!" he roared, leaping to his feet. "Do you know who you're talking to? I could order your entire family killed in a single breath." "I don't have a family," Clara replied, her voice still unwavering. "My father is dead. My mother is dead. I have nothing left to lose. And people with nothing left to lose are the most dangerous of all. Sir, you should remember that." A deadly silence fell over both sides of the screen. Francesco stood there, his face flushed with rage, fists clenched tight. But before he could say another word, a sound broke the tension. Laughter. Carlo Benedetti was laughing. Not mocking laughter, not contemptuous laughter. It was real laughter, rising from deep in his chest, the kind of laughter that comes from witnessing something unexpected and delightful. He slapped his hand on the table, shoulders shaking as he laughed. Meravigliosa, he exclaimed. Magnificent. This girl has fire. Francesco turned to his father in disbelief. Father, he began. She just gave you a lesson you should have learned 20 years ago. Carlo cut in, his voice still threaded with laughter. Never underestimate someone because of their position, and never threaten someone who has nothing left to lose. He turned back to Clara on the screen, eyes still sharp as knives, now carrying something almost like respect. What's your name, girl? Clara Whitmore. Sir, Clara. Carlo nodded, as if carving the name into his memory. I'll remember that name. Ravenna, he said, turning his gaze to Nikolai. Where did you find her? She came to me, Nikolai replied, and for the first time Clara heard something different in his voice. Not quite respect, but no longer indifference either. He was looking at her, truly looking, not looking through her like a piece of furniture, but looking at her. As if for the first time, he realized she was a person. Francesco refused to concede. The humiliation he had just suffered poured fuel onto the fire of his pride, and he decided he had to prove that this girl was nothing more than a parrot. Nothing more. He sat back down, eyes narrowing like a snake about to strike, and spoke a sentence in a language Clara had never heard in any film or course. Ancient Sicilian dialect, a tongue used only by the oldest Mafia families, passed down from generation to generation like a family secret, a language outsiders were never meant to learn. Cu nesci fora du suo paese, nesci fora di sua natura, Francesco said slowly, placing each word as if setting a trap. His eyes locked onto Clara with triumph, certain that this time she would have no answer. The room waited in silence. 12 men held their breath, even though they didn't understand what Francesco had just said. Maxwell glanced at Nikolai with concern. Nikolai remained motionless, but Clara noticed his body lean slightly forward, as if anticipating something. Clara felt her heart beat faster. She knew the sentence. She knew it because she had heard it not in books, but in a dark room on the 32nd floor 3 years earlier, when she had been mopping the floor, and 2 men in the adjacent room didn't know she could hear everything. They had been talking about loyalty and betrayal, about those who leave their homeland and lose their true nature. She had written the sentence down, looked up every word, traced its origins during countless sleepless nights. Whoever leaves his homeland leaves his own nature. Clara translated the proverb into English for Nikolai, her voice still calm. Young Mr. Benedetti is testing whether I understand Sicilian dialect. Then she turned back to Francesco on the screen, and this time she didn't translate. She answered, in Sicilian dialect, with a proverb older than Francesco's, one she had found in a worn old book at the public library, a book no one had probably opened in 50 years. U sheku chi camina vati u cavadu chi sta fermu, she said, pronouncing every syllable with the precision she had practiced hundreds of times alone in her cramped apartment. A donkey that walks is worth more than a horse that stands still. Francesco's face contorted, his eyes widened, his jaw dropped, and for a moment the heir to the Sicilian Mafia empire looked no different from a child who had just had his toy stolen. He turned to his father as if searching for an explanation for the inexplicable. Carlo Benedetti said nothing. He simply looked at Clara, and this time the smile on his lips had changed into something else. Amusement gave way to genuine respect. Where did you learn this? He asked in standard Italian, his voice carrying real curiosity. In places where people often forget that servants have ears, sir, Clara replied. And during long nights, when there was nothing else to do but study, Carlo nodded slowly, as if her answer confirmed something he had long suspected. Then he turned to Nikolai, and when he spoke, his tone had completely changed. Gone were the hints, the tests, the veiled threats. What remained was the voice of a man ready to do business. Very well, Ravenna, he said in Italian for Clara to translate. I was planning to demand an additional 30% and control of the southern route, but this girl has given me the most interesting afternoon I've had in many years. So we will keep the original terms, $80 million, profits split evenly, and the shipping route remains under joint control. Clara translated, fighting to keep her voice from trembling with relief. She had just saved a contract worth tens of millions of dollars that she would never see a single dollar of, but she had also saved her own life. Nikolai nodded, his face still unreadable. Agreed. Take good care of that girl, Ravenna, Carlo added before ending the connection. Someone like her is rare. Don't lose her. The screen went dark. The room fell silent for 1 second, 2 seconds. Then Henderson let out a breath as if he'd been spared execution. Maxwell loosened his grip on the chair back. 12 men looked at one another, none of them speaking, but all of them understanding. They had just escaped death, and they had escaped it thanks to a janitor they had mocked 5 minutes earlier. Clara rose from the chair, her legs slightly unsteady from the tension that had stretched on too long. She was about to leave the room, return to her cleaning cart, return to the invisible life she knew so well. Then, Nikolai's voice cut through the air, cold and final like a military command. "You stay." Clara stopped, turned to look at him, and for the first time, she felt afraid. Everyone out. Nikolai's voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of a death sentence. The 12 men stood up instantly. No one dared ask why. No one dared look back. Henderson was the first to rush for the door, followed by the gaunt-faced man and the fat one, then the rest. They left as if fleeing, as if the room had just turned into a furnace and they were the lucky ones spared. Maxwell Stone was the last to go. He paused at the doorway, glanced at Clara with an unreadable look, then closed the glass door behind him. The click sounded like a prison lock snapping shut. Clara stood there, alone with Nikolai Ravenna, inside the armored room on the 32nd floor. No, not alone. She remembered Mia, still sitting in the corner with her sketchbook, silent as a shadow. Nikolai walked toward the window, his back to Clara. He looked down at the city below, millions of points of light beginning to shimmer as dusk settled in. The silence stretched on. Clara felt each second fall like a drop of water into an already overflowing basin. "I'm finished interpreting," Clara said at last, forcing her voice to remain calm. "May I leave now, sir?" "No." One word, cold as ice. "How long have you worked here?" Nikolai asked, still without turning around. 4 years, sir. 4 years. He repeated it, his voice carrying something Clara couldn't read. 4 years you've walked my corridors, cleaned my conference rooms, listened to my conversations, and I didn't know you existed. Clara didn't answer. She knew it wasn't a question. "You speak Italian better than read," Nikolai continued. "You understand Sicilian dialect. You know how to negotiate with men like Benedetti. You know things you shouldn't know." Clara's heart beat faster. She didn't know where this conversation was going, but she knew it wasn't simple. "I only listen, sir," she said. "That's all. That's not all." Nikolai turned around, and this time he looked straight into Clara's eyes. The gray eyes were cold as winter, but deep within them was something else. Curiosity, or perhaps calculation. "From now on, you don't clean anymore." Clara blinked. "Sir, you're my interpreter now." The words struck Clara like a slap. Not because they insulted her, but because she understood what they truly meant. She wasn't being promoted, she was being kept. In Nikolai Ravenna's world, people with value weren't allowed to leave. They became assets, and assets belonged to their owner. "I don't think," Clara began. "I didn't ask what you think," Nikolai cut in, his tone as calm as if discussing the weather. "This is an order. You'll have a new office tomorrow, a new salary, a new life. You're no longer a cleaner. You're mine. Mine." The word echoed in Clara's head like an alarm bell. She wanted to object, to say she belonged to no one, that she'd escaped a man who once treated her like property, and she wouldn't let it happen again. But she said nothing, because she knew that in this world, opposing Nikolai Ravenna meant death. "Understood, sir," she replied, her voice steady. Nikolai studied her for a few more seconds, as if searching for any sign of resistance. Finding none, he nodded and turned back to the window. "You may go." But before Clara could take a step, a small hand tugged at the hem of her uniform. She looked down. Mia stood there, wide eyes lifted to Clara with shy hesitation. The girl didn't speak. She simply held out a sheet of paper from her sketchbook. Clara took it. The drawing was done in colored pencils, messy in the way only a 7-year-old's drawing could be. But Clara immediately recognized what it showed. A woman with yellow hands standing in the middle of a room filled with tall, dark shadows. The woman wasn't bowing her head. The woman was standing straight, and beneath the picture, in Mia's crooked handwriting, were 3 words: "She is brave." Clara looked at the drawing, then at Mia. The girl smiled, the same small smile as before, the smile forgotten children give to invisible adults. "Thank you, sweetheart," Clara whispered, her voice suddenly tight. Mia nodded, then returned to her corner as if nothing had happened. Clara walked out of the conference room, the drawing still in her hand, and as the glass door closed behind her, she didn't know that Nikolai was watching her through the reflection in the window, gray eyes carrying something even he couldn't name. The next morning, Clara walked into the Ravenna Holdings building as she did every day, but everything was different. Instead of turning left toward the janitor's room to collect her cleaning cart, she was escorted by a security guard straight to the 32nd floor in a private elevator, the same elevator she hadn't been allowed to step into for 4 years. Her new office sat right beside Nikolai's, separated by nothing more than a wall of frosted glass. The room was 10 times larger than the shabby apartment she was renting, with a black oak desk, an expensive leather chair, and windows overlooking the entire city. On the desk waited a new laptop, a new phone, and a neatly folded set of clothes inside a box. A black suit, a white shirt, high heels. No more faded silver-gray janitor uniform. No more yellow rubber gloves. Clara stood in the middle of the room, feeling as though she'd stepped into someone else's dream. She touched the surface of the desk, the back of the chair, the glass of the window, as if she needed proof that it was all real. But real didn't mean good. She knew that. She hadn't been promoted for her talent. She'd been locked inside a gilded cage because she knew too much. A soft knock pulled Clara from her thoughts. An older woman entered, gray hair pinned neatly up, her face lined with age but her eyes still sharp. Mrs. Patterson, the Ravenna family housekeeper for 30 years. Clara knew her, had seen her a few times while cleaning the upper floors, and she was one of the few who had ever nodded at Clara, instead of looking through her as if she didn't exist. "I brought you coffee," Mrs. Patterson said, setting a cup on the desk. "And a piece of advice, if you want it." Clara looked at her and waited. "Be careful," Mrs. Patterson said, lowering her voice as if afraid someone might hear. "In this world, being noticed can be more dangerous than being invisible. You've stepped out of the shadows, and now you're under the spotlight. All eyes are on you. Not all of them are friendly." "I understand," Clara replied. Mrs. Patterson shook her head. "You don't yet, but you will. Let's just hope that when you do, it isn't too late." Mrs. Patterson left, leaving Clara alone with the coffee and the unsettling warning. The days that followed passed like a storm. Clara translated documents, contracts, correspondence, encrypted messages. She sat in meetings, interpreting conversations whose content made her spine go cold. Names, locations, numbers, orders wrapped in polite language but carrying death sentences. Liquidate the shipment at the eastern port. Clean up the issue with the uncooperative partner. Deal with the one who talked to the police. Clara understood every word. Liquidate meant dispose of. Clean up meant kill. Deal with meant make disappear permanently. She took notes, translated, and kept her face blank like a machine. But every night, when she returned to her apartment, she sat in the dark and trembled. She'd seen darkness before. She'd wiped away blood. She'd heard whispers of death. But now she wasn't standing outside looking in. She was inside the eye of the storm. One evening, when the building had mostly emptied, Clara passed a room with its door slightly open. Light spilled into the hallway, and she heard Nikolai's voice speaking to someone inside. She didn't intend to stop. She shouldn't have stopped. But her feet slowed when she heard the name. Reed. Thomas Reed. The interpreter who'd been poisoned. "It wasn't an outsider," Maxwell's voice said. "We've checked. The poison came from inside. Someone in the organization wanted to sabotage the negotiations with Benedetti." Clara held her breath, pressing her back against the wall outside the door. "Find him," Nikolai said, his voice cold as ice. "And when you do, bring him to me. I want to handle it myself." Clara slipped away, her heart pounding in her chest. She'd seen something she shouldn't have seen, heard something she shouldn't have heard. And in Nikolai Ravenna's world, people who knew too much didn't live long. Mia began appearing in Clara's office on the 3rd day. She didn't knock or ask permission. She simply pushed the door open, clutching her sketchbook to her chest, and sat down on the sofa in the corner as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Clara looked up from the stack of documents, about to say something, but Mia had already bent over her sketchbook and started drawing, completely ignoring Clara's presence. So Clara said nothing. She kept working, Mia kept drawing, and the room settled into a strange silence that neither of them felt the need to break. On the 4th day, Mia came again. On the 5th day too, then the 6th, the 7th, and every day after that. The girl never spoke much, only occasionally asking Clara how to pronounce an Italian word, or holding up her newest drawing for Clara to see. Clara slowly understood. Mia wasn't coming because she wanted something. Mia came because she had nowhere else to go. This 7-year-old child lived in a building full of people, yet no one truly saw her. Nikolai was too busy with his empire. His men treated the girl like decoration. Mrs. Patterson cared, but she had too many duties of her own. Mia was a forgotten child in a world of ruthless adults, just as Clara had once been a forgotten child in a world of poverty and violence. 1 week passed, then 2. Clara grew used to Mia's presence, used to the sound of colored pencils scratching against paper, used to the sudden innocent questions that cut through her concentration while she was translating complex contracts. She also began to notice small things. Mia liked purple more than pink. Mia was afraid of thunder but not of men carrying guns. Mia never spoke about her mother, and never asked about her father, as if she had learned not to expect anything from the people who were supposed to love her. Then one day, as Clara was getting ready to leave her office, she saw Mia curled up on the sofa, eyes red as if she'd been crying. Clara stopped. "What's wrong, Mia?" The girl didn't answer, only lowered her head to stare at her sketchbook. Clara walked over, sat beside her, and waited. She'd learned that sometimes silence was the best way to let someone open up. 1 minute passed, 2. Then Mia's voice came, so soft it was almost a whisper. "Today is my birthday." Clara's heart tightened. Birthday. She looked around the room, down the hallway, across the 32nd floor. There were no balloons, no cake, no sign at all that today was a special day for a 7-year-old child. "No one remembers," Mia went on, her voice trembling. "I didn't tell anyone because I thought they'd remember. They forgot last year too, and the year before that. But I kept thinking this year would be different." Clara looked at the girl, at the wide eyes, struggling not to spill tears, at the small shoulders shaking as she fought not to cry, and she saw herself. She saw the 7-year-old child sitting alone in an empty house on her birthday, waiting for a father who never came home because he was drunk somewhere, waiting for a mother to buy a cake when there wasn't any money. She saw all the years when no one remembered she existed. "What kind of cake do you like?" Clara asked. Mia looked up, eyes wide with surprise. "Cake. Birthday cake. What flavor do you like?" "Chocolate," Mia replied, still sounding unsure, with strawberry cream on top. "Wait here. Don't go anywhere." Clara stood and hurried out of the office. For the first time since being kept on as an interpreter, she left the 32nd floor without asking permission. She went down to the ground level, stepped out onto the street, and found the nearest bakery. 45 minutes later, Clara returned with a small chocolate cake topped with strawberry cream, a bundle of birthday candles, and a purple teddy bear she'd bought from a toy shop along the way. Mia was still there, in the same spot, as if she didn't quite believe Clara would come back. When the girl saw the cake, her eyes lit up in a way Clara had never seen before. "Is this for me?" Mia asked, her voice shaking. "It's for you. Happy birthday, Mia." The girl didn't say anything. She simply stood up, ran into Clara's arms, and cried. Not the cry of sadness, but the cry of a child who was being seen for the first time. Clara held Mia, gently stroking the girl's black hair, and felt something warm spread through her chest. She didn't know that beyond the glass door, Nikolai Ravenna was standing there watching, his face unreadable. But for the first time, his gray eyes carried something that looked very much like pain. How long Nikolai stood there, he didn't know. Maybe a minute, maybe 10 minutes, maybe an entire lifetime. He watched through the glass as Clara placed candles on the small cake, watched Mia blow them out with eyes bright as stars, and then he heard a sound he had forgotten long ago. Mia's laughter. Not the polite laughter children give when adults ask them to laugh, not the forced laughter when someone tries too hard to be funny, but real laughter, clear and ringing, the kind of laughter children are meant to have, but that Mia hadn't had for 3 years since her father died. Nikolai felt something stab sharply in his chest, in the place where his heart should have been if he still had one. He had forgotten his niece's birthday. Not once, not twice, but 3 years in a row. 3 years he had allowed Mia to live like a shadow in his own building, giving her everything material but denying her the one thing she needed most: attention, care. An adult who saw her as a child rather than decoration. And now, a janitor he hadn't even known existed 2 weeks ago had done what he hadn't managed to do in 3 years. She had made Mia laugh. Nikolai retreated into the shadows, letting no one see him, and walked away. But the image stayed with him all day like a ghost that refused to leave. That night, when the entire building had fallen silent, Nikolai noticed that the light was still on in Clara's office. He didn't know why his feet carried him there. He didn't know why he pushed the door open without knocking. He only knew that he needed to see her, needed to speak to her, Needed to understand how a woman with nothing could do what he, with all his power and money, could not. Clara looked up from her stack of documents, not appearing surprised to see him. She simply looked and waited, as if she were used to Nikolai appearing without warning. "You're still awake," he said. Not a question. "So are you, sir." Nikolai stepped inside and closed the door behind him. He didn't sit. He stood by the window, looking out at the sleeping city. The silence stretched on. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was just silence. "You organized Mia's birthday," he finally said. Clara didn't answer right away. "Yes, sir." "Why?" "Because no one else did." The answer was so simple it was cruel. Nikolai felt it like a knife driven straight into his chest. He turned to look at Clara, at the woman sitting under the warm light with calm eyes that held no fear. "You worked for me for 4 years, he said. "You know what kind of man I am. You know the things I do, the people I've killed. Why aren't you afraid of me?" Clara set her pen down and met his gaze. In 4 years, no one had dared look at him like that. As if he were just an ordinary man, not a monster, not a boss, not someone with the power of life and death. "Because I've already lost everything that can be lost, sir," she replied. "My father died when I was 19 because he got involved with people like you. My mother died 2 years later from poverty and illness. I was beaten for 3 years by the man I once loved. I've seen hell, sir. I've lived in it. Fear is a luxury for people who still have something to lose. I don't have anything left." Silence. Nikolai stood there, looking at Clara, and for the first time in many years, he didn't know what to say. "You're wrong," he finally said, his voice lower than usual. "You still have one thing left to lose. Your life." Clara didn't look away. "A life with nothing to live for. Is it worth keeping, sir?" Nikolai didn't answer. He couldn't, because the question touched something deep inside him, something he had buried since his mother took her own life, since his father was murdered, since his wife betrayed him. He had lived like a walking corpse for years, living for power, for revenge, for momentum. But had he ever truly lived? "You're different from everyone I've ever met," Nikolai said, his voice carrying something he himself didn't recognize. "You should hate people like me, people who destroyed your life. But you don't. Hatred doesn't change the past, sir. It only burns the person who carries it. I chose to let go, not because I forgive, but because I want to live, not just exist." Nikolai looked at her for a long time, then turned and left the room without another word. But as the door closed behind him, he knew something had changed. The ice that had encased him for so many years had just shown its first crack. 3 weeks had passed since that night. 3 weeks during which Clara felt a subtle change in the way Nikolai looked at her. No longer the look that passed through her as if she were an object. No longer the calculating gaze reserved for an asset. It was the look of someone trying to understand something he had never encountered before. But that fragile calm shattered one afternoon, when the elevator doors on the 32nd floor slid open and a woman stepped out. She was beautiful in a way that made people hold their breath. 34 years old, honey blonde hair, eyes blue as the Caribbean Sea, a body sculpted like marble beneath designer dresses. But Clara, who had learned to read people during years of living with violence, saw something else beneath that perfect beauty. Danger. The kind of danger carried by venomous snakes disguised in brilliant colors. Natasha Volkov, someone whispered in the hallway. The boss's ex-wife. Clara stiffened. She had heard that name before, in conversations she wasn't meant to hear, in documents she had translated. Natasha Volkov, the woman who had been Nikolai Ravenna's wife for 2 years, the woman who sold information to a rival mafia, the woman who had nearly cost Nikolai his life in an ambush 5 years earlier, and Nikolai had spared her, the one decision Maxwell said he regretted to this day. Natasha walked as if she were still the mistress of the building, as if 5 years of exile had never happened. She didn't look at anyone, didn't greet anyone, just headed straight toward Nikolai's office with the confidence of someone who knew she still held power. But halfway there, she stopped, right in front of Clara's office door. Blue eyes swept over Clara with undisguised contempt. "Oh," she said, her voice clear as crystal but sharp as a blade. "Servants get offices now. Has Ravenna fallen this far?" Clara didn't answer. She was used to insults, but she wasn't used to the chill that crawled up her spine when she met Natasha's eyes. They were the eyes of someone without a soul, eyes that could smile while plunging a knife into someone's back. Natasha snorted and walked on, leaving Clara with a racing heart and icy hands. 20 minutes later, shouting erupted from Nikolai's office. Not Nikolai's voice. He never shouted. It was Natasha's, shrill and furious. I have rights. Mia is my niece. By law, I can demand guardianship. Clara stood and stepped into the hallway. She shouldn't listen. She knew she shouldn't, but she was worried about Mia. She had seen Natasha's eyes, and she knew this woman loved no one but herself. I don't want the child. Nikolai's voice rang out, cold as ice. What do you want? Money, power, or a way to get close to me again and finish what you didn't 5 years ago? Silence, then Natasha's laughter, light and chilling. You're still angry about that, Nikolai. It's been 5 years. I've changed. I just want the child to be properly cared for. You're Mafia. You can't raise a little girl. I can give her a normal life. Get out. Nikolai's voice dropped, more dangerous than any shout. Before I forget that I spared your life once. You can't throw me out, Natasha replied calmly. I have lawyers. I have evidence of what you do. If you don't give me custody of Mia, I'll take everything to court. And you know what happens when the police start investigating Ravenna Holdings. The door flew open. Natasha stormed out, her face flushed with rage, though she struggled to maintain her pride. She shot Clara a look full of malice. Enjoy your position while you can, servant, she said quietly. It won't last long. Then she stepped into the elevator and vanished. Clara stood there, her heart pounding, trying to process what she had just heard. But before she could think, a small figure ran toward her from the end of the hallway. Mia. The girl rushed forward, her face pale, wide eyes filled with terror, and crashed into Clara. She was shaking so hard Clara could feel every tremor through her clothes. She's back, Mia whispered, her voice breaking with tears. She wants to take me away. I don't want to go with her. I'm scared of her. Please don't let her take me. Clara wrapped her arms tightly around Mia, gently stroking the girl's black hair. I'm here, she whispered. I won't let anyone take you. She didn't know if she had the right to promise that. She was just an interpreter, just a promoted servant, just no one in this world of power and violence. But holding Mia's trembling body, Clara knew she would do anything to protect this child, even if it meant standing against Natasha Volkov. Natasha didn't give up. In the days that followed, she appeared at Ravenna Holdings like an uninvited ghost, drifting through the corridors, chatting with the men, smiling at those who had once served her when she had still been mistress of the house. Clara watched from a distance, watched the way Natasha whispered into Henderson's ear, the way she laughed with the gaunt-faced man, the way she rested her hand on men's arms and looked at them with those bright blue eyes full of promise. She was building allies, planting doubt, manipulating one person at a time like a patient spider weaving its web, and Clara knew exactly what she was saying about her. Do you know that new interpreter? Natasha said to Henderson in the hallway, her voice loud enough for Clara to hear from her office. Her father was drowning in debt and died because of gambling. Betrayal runs in her blood. She's just a servant in disguise, trying to climb into the boss's bed to gain status. Henderson nodded, his eyes flicking toward Clara with the contempt he had been suppressing for weeks. Now someone had given him permission to show it openly, and he didn't hesitate. The rumors spread like a disease. Clara felt the shift in the way people looked at her, in the whispers behind her back, in the hostile glances when she walked down the hall. But she didn't care. She was used to being hated. What she cared about was Mia. Natasha began approaching the child. Every day she brought new gifts, expensive dolls, designer dresses, promises of a wonderful life if Mia would just go with her. But Mia wasn't fooled. A 7-year-old, with the instincts of someone who had been abandoned too many times, could see the falseness behind Natasha's sweet smile. Whenever Natasha appeared, Mia ran to hide behind Clara, clinging to her skirt like a lifeline. Until one day, Natasha lost her patience. Clara was working in her office when she heard Mia crying in the hallway. She rushed out and saw Natasha gripping Mia's wrist, pulling the girl toward the elevator. "Come with Auntie," Natasha said, her voice still sweet but her hand squeezing so tightly Mia winced in pain. "Auntie will buy you ice cream. We'll go for a walk. You don't need to stay in this dark place." "I don't want to," Mia cried, struggling. "I want to stay. I want Clara." "Clara," Natasha sneered. "That servant is nobody. She's just... let her go." Clara's voice cut through the hallway, cold and decisive. She stood there, blocking Natasha's path to the elevator, back straight, eyes locked onto the venomous blue gaze in front of her. Natasha stopped, but she didn't release Mia. "What did you just say to me?" she asked, her voice dropping into something dangerous. I told you to let her go, Clara repeated. You're hurting her. Natasha looked at Clara as if she were an insect, daring to crawl onto her shoe. Do you know who you're talking to? I'm Natasha Volkov. I used to own this place. And what are you? A servant who happens to speak Italian. Don't think that just because Nikolai lets you sit in a nice office, you have the right to interfere in my affairs. You can be anyone you want, Clara replied, her voice steady. But you don't get to hurt this child. Not while I'm standing here. Natasha released Mia. The girl immediately ran to Clara and hid behind her, sobbing. But Natasha didn't retreat. She stepped closer. So close Clara could smell her expensive perfume, and smiled, cold as ice. You dare challenge me, she whispered. A servant dares challenge me. Don't you know what I can do to you? And without waiting for an answer, Natasha raised her hand and struck. The slap was so hard Clara staggered, her cheek burning, the metallic taste of blood filling her mouth. But she didn't fall. She didn't step back. She just stood there, shielding Mia, blood at the corner of her lips, staring straight into the eyes of the woman who had hit her. You can hit me, Clara said, her voice eerily calm, but you don't touch this child. Natasha raised her hand again, but it was stopped in midair by another hand, bigger, stronger, and cold as ice. Natasha, Nikolai said, his voice so low it was almost a whisper. Get out, now. Natasha turned, her face draining of color when she saw Nikolai standing right behind her. He looked as though he'd been there for some time, gray eyes darkening as they took in the blood on Clara's lip. Nikolai, I was just... Natasha began. Get out, Nikolai repeated, each word falling like a hammer. Before I forget, you were once my wife. Before I do what I should have done 5 years ago. For the first time since she arrived, Natasha looked afraid. She stepped back, looking at Nikolai, then at Clara, then at Mia crying behind her. This isn't over, she hissed. Then she turned and hurried toward the elevator, the sound of her heels echoing like a racing heartbeat in the deadly silence of the hallway. When the elevator doors closed, Clara finally let out a breath. Her knees suddenly weakened, and she almost collapsed, but a hand caught her. Nikolai's hand. Are you all right? He asked, and for the first time, his voice carried something that sounded very much like concern. Clara didn't answer right away. She was trying to control her breathing, trying to keep her legs from trembling, trying to appear strong, even as her body betrayed her with every passing second. Mia was still clinging tightly behind her, sobbing, and Clara forced herself to focus on the child instead of the sharp pain pulsing at the corner of her mouth. It's all right now, Mia, she said gently, turning to stroke the girl's hair. She's gone. No one's going to hurt you anymore. Nikolai motioned to Mrs. Patterson, who had appeared without Clara even noticing, her aged eyes filled with worry. Take Mia with you. Give her some hot chocolate and stay with her until she falls asleep. Mrs. Patterson nodded and gently led Mia away. The girl glanced back at Clara one more time, as if needing to be sure she was still there, still safe. Clara smiled reassuringly, even though the movement made the split on her lip ache more. When Mia and Mrs. Patterson disappeared around the corner, Nikolai turned back to Clara. Come with me, he said. Not an invitation, but an order. Clara followed him into his office, a room she had entered many times to translate documents but had never felt as heavy as it did now. Nikolai closed the door, walked to the liquor cabinet, took out a bottle of whiskey, and poured some onto a white handkerchief. Then he turned back and stood in front of Clara, so close she could smell tobacco and sandalwood on him. He raised his hand. Clara didn't flinch, didn't step back, even though instinct screamed that she should. Nikolai's hand touched her chin, gently lifting her face, and pressed the handkerchief to the wound at the corner of her mouth. The alcohol burned against her skin, but Clara didn't grimace. She had endured far worse pain than this. You protected Mia, Nikolai said, his voice low and even. You knew Natasha could kill you, and you still protected her. Why? Because Mia is a child, Clara replied, looking straight into his eyes. And I was once a child no one protected. I know what that feels like. I don't want Mia to know it. Silence fell. Nikolai kept the cloth against her lip, but his gray eyes were fixed on her with something she'd never seen in them before. Not calculation, not coldness, but pain. Pain buried so deep it had almost turned to stone, yet still there, still smoldering. Your past, he said. I've had it investigated. Your father died because of Mafia debt. Your mother died from poverty. You were abused for 3 years. Clara wasn't surprised. She'd known Nikolai would investigate her. It was his nature, knowing everything about everyone around him. "You know everything," she said. "Then you also know why I'm not afraid of death." Nikolai lowered his hand, the handkerchief now stained red with her blood. He looked at it for a moment, then looked up, and for the first time, he spoke about himself. "My mother killed herself when I was 15. Clara stayed silent, waiting. She couldn't bear this life, Nikolai continued, his voice flat, as if telling someone else's story. She couldn't bear the blood, the violence, watching her husband kill people. One night, she went up to the roof and stepped off. I was the one who found her." Clara felt her chest tighten. She wanted to say something, but there were no words that were enough. 2 years later, my father was killed, Nikolai went on, by the man closest to him. The one he trusted like a brother. I had to watch my father die in his own blood and couldn't do anything. He paused, his jaw tightening. Then, I married Natasha. I thought I could have a normal life. I thought someone could love me for who I was, not for power. But she sold me to my enemies, nearly got me killed in an ambush. He looked at Clara, and in that moment she didn't see a mafia boss. She saw a lonely man, crushed by betrayal and loss, driven into darkness by the very people who should have loved him. "I haven't trusted anyone since," he said. "I don't trust kindness. I don't trust love. I treat people like tools, because at least tools don't betray you, until—" He stopped, as if weighing whether to continue. "Until I met you." Clara stopped breathing. She didn't know what she was waiting for, didn't know what she was hoping for. She only knew that the distance between her and Nikolai had suddenly become very small, so small she could count the silver strands at his temple. "You're not afraid of me," Nikolai said, almost in a whisper. "You don't want anything from me. You protected my niece with your own life. You're the first person in many years who's made me." He paused, searching for the words. "Made me want to believe again." Clara looked at him, at those gray eyes opening for the first time after years of being sealed shut, and she felt something shift between them. Not love, not yet, but the fragile connection of two broken souls recognizing each other in the dark. The intimate moment between them was shattered by a sharp, urgent knock on the door. Maxwell Stone entered without waiting to be invited, his face pale in a way Clara had never seen during her time working here. "Boss," Maxwell said, his voice stretched tight like a wire. "We have a serious problem." Nikolai shifted instantly, from a man who had just opened himself back into the cold mafia boss in the blink of an eye. He stepped away from Clara, his gray eyes turning hard as steel. "Speak," he ordered. "Natasha is working with Kozlov," Maxwell replied. "The Kozlov family, Russian mafia. Ravenna's sworn enemy for 20 years. Clara had seen the name in documents she'd translated, knew about the shadow war between the two families, understood that Kozlov would do anything to bring Nikolai down. "We intercepted some communications," Maxwell continued. "Natasha doesn't just want Mia. She's using the custody battle as a distraction. While we're focused on courts and lawyers, Kozlov will strike. They've planned everything in detail. Someone inside is feeding them information." "When?" Nikolai asked, his voice steady even though the news could mean death. 3 days, Maxwell said. "Saturday night. They know your schedule, the security layout, everything." Clara stood still in the corner, trying not to draw attention, but her mind was racing. 3 days. Only 3 days before Kozlov attacked. And if they succeeded, Nikolai would die, Mia would fall into Natasha's hands. Everything Clara had tried to protect would vanish. Then she remembered something. The notebook. The small notebook she'd kept for 4 years, from nights cleaning meeting rooms, from conversations people thought she couldn't hear, from scraps of paper she'd read before throwing them away. She didn't know why she'd written everything down. Maybe it was how she survived, knowing what was happening so she could avoid danger. Maybe it was the instinct of the powerless, gathering information like weapons. Whatever the reason, she knew now that what she had could save Nikolai. "Sir," Clara said, her voice calm even as her heart pounded. "I have something that can help you." Nikolai and Maxwell turned to her, surprised. Clara walked to her desk, where her small bag rested, and took out an old leather notebook, worn and frayed from being opened and closed too many times. "What is this?" Nikolai asked. "For 4 years," Clara replied, placing it on the desk. "I wrote down everything I heard, saw, read, conversations in meeting rooms, names that came up, plans, deals. I didn't know why back then, but now I do. I was too terrified to show you this sooner, sir. I thought if you knew I had been recording your secrets, you would kill me. But now, with Mia in danger, I don't care anymore." Nikolai picked up the notebook and flipped through the pages. His face stayed controlled, but Clara saw his eyes widen slightly with each page. Maxwell leaned in, reading over his shoulder, and let out a stunned curse. His finger stopped at a name near the top of the page. "Henderson," he muttered, his face darkening with rage. "That rat has been feeding them intel for months. Security, take him away. Make sure he never speaks again." 2 guards immediately seized Henderson, dragging the screaming man out of the conference room toward the soundproof exit. His fate was sealed. "My God," Maxwell said, turning back to Clara with wide eyes. "You know all of this. You have a list of moles, Kozlov's timetable, Natasha's weak points. No one pays attention to the help," Clara said. "That's the strength and the curse of people like me." Nikolai looked up at her, and in his eyes was something Clara couldn't name. "You could sell this information to Kozlov," he said slowly. "They'd pay you enough to disappear and start a new life." "Why didn't you?" "Because of Mia," Clara answered. "If you die, she'll have no one." Silence held for a beat. "Only because of Mia?" Nikolai asked, his voice carrying something Clara couldn't quite place. Clara looked at him, at the man who had opened himself to her moments earlier, the man she was beginning to see beyond the cruelty. "And because you're not entirely the monster you think you are," she said softly. Nikolai said nothing, only studied her for a long second, then turned to Maxwell. "Call in everyone we trust," he ordered. "Purge the moles on this list. Restructure security. We won't wait for Kozlov to strike. We'll set the trap." Maxwell nodded and hurried out. Nikolai turned back to Clara, and for the first time since she'd walked into that room full of killers more than a month ago, he said 2 words she never thought she'd hear from a Mafia boss. "Thank you." 2 words. But in Nikolai Ravenna's world, they weighed as much as mountains. 3 days passed like 3 seconds. Clara spent most of that time with Mia, trying to keep the little girl calm, while outside the safe room the entire organization prepared for war. Saturday night arrived faster than she expected. The first gunshot rang out at 11 o'clock at night, tearing through the building's silence like lightning in a clear sky. Then the second, the third, the fourth. A relentless downpour of gunfire mixed with screams, shattering glass, and hurried footsteps echoing through the corridors. Kozlov had come, but they didn't know that Nikolai was waiting for them. Clara held Mia tightly in the safe room deep in the basement, where Nikolai had taken them before the fighting began. The room was built of reinforced concrete, the door half a meter thick, strong enough to withstand a bomb. Still, Clara trembled, not for herself, but for Nikolai out there amid bullets and death. "Clara," Mia whispered, her voice shaking. "Is Uncle Nikolai okay?" "He'll be fine," Clara replied, forcing her voice steady while her heart felt like it might burst. "He's very strong." The gunfire continued above them, sometimes close, sometimes distant. Clara counted each explosion, trying to guess how the battle was unfolding. She didn't know how much time passed. Maybe 10 minutes, maybe an hour, maybe a lifetime. Then the gunfire stopped. The sudden silence was more terrifying than the noise. Clara held her breath, tightened her arms around Mia, and stared at the steel door. She waited. She waited for Nikolai's familiar footsteps. She waited for his low voice saying everything was over. But the silence stretched on, heavy and suffocating. Thinking the battle was won and Nikolai might be injured, Clara made a decision. Trembling, she unlocked the heavy steel door and pushed it open. But as she stepped into the corridor, a figure emerged from the shadows. Natasha Volkov stood there, a gun in her hand, blood smeared across her cheek, blue eyes blazing with the madness of someone who had nothing left to lose. "Hello, servant girl," Natasha said, her voice trembling with rage and perhaps fear. "It seems our plan didn't go as expected. Kozlov failed. My men are dead, but at least I'll take what I want." Clara stood, pushing Mia behind her, shielding the small body with her own. "Drop the gun, Natasha," she said, her voice eerily calm as she stared down the barrel. "You can't escape. The building is sealed." Natasha laughed, shrill and chilling. "I know, but if I die, I won't die alone. Give me the girl, and you live." Clara didn't move. "No." Natasha tilted her head as if considering something, then aimed the gun straight at Clara's chest. "Who do you think you are?" she demanded, her voice shaking with fury. "A servant. No one will remember you if you die. No one will cry. No one will care. You're nobody." "Maybe," Clara replied evenly. "But Mia will remember, And I'd rather die so Mia keeps a good memory than live and let her suffer. Natasha's eyes darkened. Her finger tightened on the trigger. Clara closed her eyes, waiting for the shot, waiting for a death she hadn't feared for a long time. But the gunshot came from another direction. Clara opened her eyes and saw the weapon fly from Natasha's hand, blood spilling from her wrist. Natasha screamed and collapsed, clutching her wounded arm. And in the doorway of the safe room stood Nikolai Ravenna, smoke rising from the gun in his hand, blood on his face, clothes torn from the fight, but his gray eyes fixed only on Clara. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice hoarse with fear. Clara felt her knees give way. All the strength she'd held together for so long suddenly dissolved. She sank down, legs unable to support her, and for the first time since entering Nikolai's world, she allowed herself to be afraid. "The child," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Mia." "She's safe," Nikolai said, moving quickly to her side. "You're safe. It's over." He knelt beside her, one hand supporting her back, the other still holding the gun trained on Natasha as she groaned on the floor. Maxwell and the men rushed in, bound Natasha, and dragged her away. Mia ran forward, throwing her arms around both Clara and Nikolai, sobbing. Clara held the child with one arm and clutched Nikolai's hand with the other, refusing to let go. And in the safe room beneath the earth, amid the smell of gunpowder and blood, 3 broken souls found one another, found what they had lost long ago. Family. Clara woke up in a stark white room filled with the familiar scent of hospital disinfectant. She didn't remember when she had passed out, only the crushing exhaustion after everything ended, after Natasha was arrested, after Kozlov was destroyed, after she finally allowed herself to collapse. The first thing she saw when she opened her eyes was Mia curled up beside her on the hospital bed, arms wrapped tightly around Clara's arm as if afraid she might disappear. And in the chair in the corner of the room, Nikolai Ravenna sat there, dark circles under his eyes from lack of sleep. Yet those gray eyes were fixed on her, only on her. "You scared me," he said hoarsely. "Don't ever do that again." Clara smiled weakly. And that was the beginning of a new chapter. 2 years later, Clara stood on the stage of New York University, holding the interpreter's degree she had dreamed of for so many years. The auditorium was packed, but she saw only 2 faces in the 5th row. Mia was holding a handmade sign covered in glitter pen, the crooked words reading, "Clara is the best in the world and she is my mom." Beside the little girl, Nikolai was trying and failing miserably to keep her seated. When Clara's name was called, Mia jumped up on her chair and shouted, "That's my mom, she's the best." The entire hall burst into laughter. Clara laughed too, tears streaming down her cheeks, not from sadness but from happiness, from knowing that all the sleepless nights studying in a run-down room had finally meant something, from proving to everyone who had once mocked her that they were wrong. After the graduation ceremony, the 3 of them returned to Nikolai's apartment. Clara stepped inside and froze. Candles everywhere, fresh flowers filling the living room, the dining table set like something from the romantic films she used to secretly watch when she was still a janitor. Mia ran around, inspecting everything, grinning from ear to ear. "Do you like it, Mom?" Dad prepared for a whole week. Clara turned to look at Nikolai, the man who had once been cold as ice, now standing there looking tense like a boy on his first date. Throughout dinner, Mia kept asking strange questions. "Do you like rings, Mom? Do you like diamonds or pearls? Do you want to wear a white dress?" Clara grew suspicious but didn't ask, only smiled and answered each question. After dinner, when the 3 of them were sitting in the living room, Mia suddenly shouted, "Now, Dad, go!" Nikolai stood up, ran a hand through his hair, walked to the window, and then turned back. "I have a speech prepared," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "It's very good. Very romantic. I practiced all week." "Dad cried twice while practicing," Mia added. Clara laughed, and that laughter seemed to give Nikolai the courage he needed. He stepped in front of her, knelt down, and took a black velvet box from his jacket pocket. When he opened it, Clara saw a simple yet elegant ring with an amber stone shimmering in the candlelight, the same color as her eyes. "Clara Whitmore," Nikolai said, his voice low and sincere. 2 years ago, you were the help no one saw, the woman pushing a cleaning cart through my corridors. Today, you're the woman who saved my company, saved my niece, saved me from myself. You're the woman I love." Mia bounced on the sofa, trying and completely failing to stay quiet. "Will you marry me?" Nikolai asked, his gray eyes holding all the honesty he possessed. Clara looked at him, looked at Mia, looked at the ring, looked at a life that had transformed from an invisible janitor into a woman who was loved. "Yes," she whispered, tears falling freely. "Yes, 1,000,000 times yes." Mia screamed with joy and threw herself around both of them. "I knew it. I planned everything. Can I be the flower girl? I've been practicing throwing petals." Nikolai slid the ring onto Clara's finger, then wrapped his arms around her and Mia, and in that room filled with candles and flowers, 3 people who had once been broken found one another, found family, found love. Everyone who had once laughed at that janitor was now stunned, and Clara, the woman who had been invisible for so many years, finally shone. Clara's story reminds us that a person's value doesn't lie in status or degrees, but in the courage to step out of the shadows, to say, "I can do this," when the whole world laughs. Sometimes the most overlooked people are the strongest of all, and true love can bloom in places no one ever expects. How do you feel about this story? Have you ever been looked down on and still stood up to prove your worth? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd truly love to hear the stories from deep within your hearts. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it, share it with your friends and loved ones, and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss our daily touching stories. We wish all of you watching good health, a joyful life, and peace every day. Thank you for being with us. Goodbye, and see you in the next video.